ironic as that may seem, the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, was perhaps the worst way to experience the Game Boy's library. This thing was heavy, the screen was basically garbage. And again, this is coming from a massive Game Boy fanatic. Thankfully, we don't need to rely on the original DMG to play its amazing library of games. So what can you use? Nay, should you use? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. The original Game Boy was pretty bad, and I've done a whole video on it. You can check it out right here. But the Cliff's Notes is basically this. This thing was bulky, it was heavy, it was not the best to hold. The screen was awful. Did I mention how bad the screen was? I can't stand to play for more than 5 minutes on the original Game Boy, and the main reason is the screen. And though I have things like this modded Game Boy Pocket right here with a much better screen with much richer contrast, not as much ghosting, it's pretty awesome. But you know me, I can't settle. So I have some other very unofficial devices that I use to play the Game Boy library. And I've shown some of these here on the channel even recently, as is the case with one of them. But people have been asking me to compare these two right here, so that maybe we can come up with a final verdict on which device provides the best Game Boy playing experience. So let's take a look at these guys here. Right here, as you can see, I have two Game Boy clones. On the right here, let's get the BittBoy out of the way. On the right here, I have the GB Boy Color, which is a backlit Game Boy Color clone. Now this thing, let me get my Game Boy Color here. Or one of them anyway, the other one is up on my wall. So this is my Pokemon Game Boy Color, and it's a little dusty, as you can see. I don't play that much on original hardware because I have so many other things that do a better job at playing Game Boy games. That's what happens, my stuff is a little dusty. Does that make me a bad collector? Probably. Anyway, so I have the Pokemon Game Boy Color right here, and as you can see, compared to the GB Boy Color, it's a little bit smaller, but not by much on every dimension. And I'm gonna put it over the other one here. As you can see, it's slightly bigger. Just to give an idea of the dimensions on this thing, it's not very noticeable. So the GB Boy Color, as I mentioned, is a Game Boy Color clone with a backlit screen. Now, it runs on, what is it, AA batteries right here, just like the Game Boy Color. So that's nice. And as you can see, it has an actual cartridge slot here. So you can load, let's say I have Worms Armageddon right here, one of my favorite games on PC. On the Game Boy, not the best. So when I flick this thing on, as you can see, it has a weird splash screen. And I'm not sure if it's, you know, very noticeable there on the camera, but the color reproduction, the contrast, everything on this screen is really top notch. Let me try a different game here. Let's see, I have a little pile of Game Boy games here to try. Let's see here. I have Pokemon, the trading card game here. I have Prince of Persia. Those black cartridges, for those who didn't know, are games that came out on the Game Boy but work on the Game Boy Color. So if you play it on the regular Game Boy, it's just a regular game. But if you play it on a let's try that again. But if you play it on a Game Boy Color, you will play it with colors. Let's see. Let's get this out of the frame here. Here we go. So as you can see, a really decent screen. Now, this would be perfect if not for the fact that the screen has an odd aspect ratio. I'm not sure if you can tell from looking at them side by side, but the Game Boy Color screen is more of a square, whereas this is slightly squished, so the aspect ratio is not perfect, and that might annoy some people. To me, it's still pretty decent. It makes for a great, let's try a regular Game Boy game. Let's try Super Mario Land 2 right here. Let's get this out of the frame as well. So you flick it on, and then as you can see, the image of Prince of Persia was there for a second. And let me turn on the volume here. Okay, let's try that again. Let's get it out for a second. Give it a good blow. Yeah, just like old times. Let's try that again. Okay, flick it on. You got that GB Boy Color splash screen, and here we go. And yeah, like that is very nice. And again, if you can get past the fact that the screen doesn't have the right aspect ratio, this is a very, very solid clone. Now, here's an interesting function that this thing has. It doesn't just run actual Game Boy cartridges. The other thing that this thing does, if you turn this thing on without a game in the slot here on the back, this is what you'll see. A list with 188 Game Boy games. Now, I never went through the entire list, but I assume, as is the case with these Chinese clones, a lot of them are the same game, but just repeated. Often that is the case with these things, and I've played with a lot of these things. So there's a chance, like I said, I never looked through the whole list. There's a chance it doesn't actually have 188 games. You will definitely see a lot of classics like Contra, Super Mario Land right there. Check this out. Not bad, right? Let's turn it off. You have to wait a second before you turn it back on, because otherwise it'll load back into the game that you were playing previously. Not sure why exactly that happens, and I guess that's what happened just there. Let's turn it off, wait a little bit longer, and then turn it back on. Yeah, like I was just saying, it definitely loops the game list right there. You have Contra, you got Super Mario Land again, all the way down in 134. Those are the first games to show up on this huge list, so yeah, it obviously loops. I read somewhere that this thing only has 30 games, and I probably should have checked that before I started this video, but the reality is I never really played these part of games that it comes with. I use this thing mostly to play my actual Game Boy game collection. So I have to say, the GB Boy Color makes for a phenomenal Game Boy playing experience. That backlit screen is, provided you can get past the fact that the aspect ratio is a little off, is stellar. The color reproduction is very faithful. The contrast is great. The viewing angles, look at that. The viewing angles, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of glare from the lamps I use here in my studio, but this is decent. Now, obviously, if you're in the market for a Game Boy clone, you have to consider the new BittBoy. As I mentioned in a recent video, where is the old thing? The original BittBoy was just an NES clone. It wasn't that exciting. You couldn't save your progress, making this thing really just a novelty. Like, it's not something I would spend a lot of time playing any game on because I can't really save my progress. So though the original BittBoy was kind of cool, I guess, I never played with it for much more than the initial 40 minutes that I played with in order to do my video on it. This thing, on the other hand, the new BittBoy, is pretty incredible. Now, I have to say, there are a lot of flaws with this thing. Emulation isn't perfect with every game. There is a little bit of screen tearing. The sound can get weird with some games. Not all, but some games. So if you're an emulation purist, this will likely annoy you a little bit because of that. Now, let me turn this thing on here. So this thing, as I'm sure you know by now, doesn't take Game Boy cartridges. I mean, it's not much bigger than the Game Boy cartridge. It'd be cool if it could fit in here, but yeah, there's a space issue here. So this thing is an emulator that runs not only Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but also NES games. Now, that alone already puts it a step above the GB Boy Color because you could only play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on this thing. Now, it's also much, much smaller, making it very, very pocketable. I'm not sure how much you value portability. I do, a lot. So something that is this small is something that I can confidently take with me wherever I go. I throw it in my pocket if I have, say, 10 minutes or so while I'm waiting for something to play, another level of, I don't know, Burger Time or Super Mario Land 2. I can. If not, it's not a huge issue that I have it with me, as opposed to, say, something like the Switch. When I bring my Switch out with me, I have to kind of plan around that. I have to bring it in a case or a small backpack. It's not something that I can just casually toss it in my pocket and go out. So that is pretty awesome. Now, this thing runs ROMs, and you can load the ROMs using this micro SD slot here on the top. Interestingly, the original BittBoy had what seemed like a micro SD slot, but there's actually nothing here. There's nothing connected to the board. If you were to throw a micro SD, it would just fall to the bottom of the assembly here. So that's not great. So anyway, like I was saying, it runs NES games, it'll run Game Boy games, and it'll also run Game Boy Color games. So I'm gonna load one here for you to see. And as you can see, I did a little mod here on mine. This button here was actually the B button. I just opened this here and swapped the buttons because this here makes it look a little bit more like the original Game Boy. So it's still, this button is still the B. It still operates as the B. I just swapped the plastic buttons, so it looks a little bit more like a Game Boy. In case you're wondering, because every other BittBoy you're going to see out there is not going to have this button orientation. This is going to be where the B button is. So I'm going to load Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX here, and as you can see, it is gorgeous, flat out gorgeous. Let me load that up, and here's the problem. The BittBoy has no native saves. So even though the original cartridge for Link's Awakening had battery saves, this thing will not battery save. There is a way around that. If you press the R button right here, you go into the settings and then you go into the save menu. There's a save game right there. You can just load, and here you go. So you're not exactly losing your progress when you're playing a game on the new BittBoy. You just can't use the native save feature in the games. So like saying Pokemon, if you press start and go to save, the game will act like it's saving, but when you load the ROM again, that save file is gone. So that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, as you can see, now the screen on this thing, there is a little bit of screen tearing, especially when there's a lot of horizontal movement. I'll show you what I mean here. And I know I'm sucking right now because I'm basically playing this upside down. I'm playing through my monitor basically here, so cut me some slack. As you can see, there is a significant amount of screen tearing, especially when the screen, like when you move like that, like I'm sure you can tell, right? Like it's pretty bad. It's distracting in a lot of games. In the aspect ratio, obviously I'm stretching the image to fill the whole screen here, but you can also change that by going to settings and then changing the mode here. So this is what the games actually look like on original hardware, and it's still not perfect. I'm not sure if you can tell. It's more noticeable when there's a lot of text on the screen because the scaling is kind of wrong. The resolution doesn't quite match the original hardware resolution. So the lines, like some lines will be have the right pixel width, and others appear to be a little bit thicker, so it's not perfect. That's the problem. But that being said, the fact that you can play all NES games, all Game Boy games, and all Game Boy Color games, and the fact that this thing is so portable, and the fact that you don't have to worry about batteries because this thing has a rechargeable battery that you charge over micro USB here at the bottom, and the fact that it looks pretty close to what the original Game Boy looked like. They kind of went for the same color scheme here. I like that. I have to say, both of these are great in their own way. The GB Boy Color is great if you're a collector and you want to actually play real Game Boy games. It comes with a bunch of Game Boy ROMs, but you should only really be picking up a GB Boy Color if you intend to build an actual Game Boy and Game Boy Color game collection. Now, the new BittBoy, on the other hand, if you're not looking to collect actual games and you want something more portable and you want a larger library, again, this thing runs NES games, so that's pretty cool. The new BittBoy is the way to go. Again, they're both great. I think if you're a collector like me and you just want a better way to play your Game Boy Color games, this is not a bad way to go. If you already have, especially if you already have a collection of games, I would definitely recommend the GB Boy Color. They're both about the same price, which makes it, I guess, a little bit tougher because I can't just say go with the cheaper one if you want to save some money. They're about the same. So yeah, this is how the GB Boy Color compares with the new BittBoy. What do you think? Which one do you prefer? As always, tell me where you guys are watching these videos from. I always love to hear where you guys are from. Follow me on social media, both Twitter and Instagrams. The links are going to be down in the description. I'm very active on both. I post tons of pictures of my collection of behind the scenes stuff. I think you're going to like it. And that's all the time I have for today. I'm Izzy and I'm done.